Hello, everyone. Welcome to our world today, the live discussion. Today, we are talking about a pretty important subject, which is the crash of Iran's president and foreign minister's helicopter, which resulted in them passing away, and how this will probably impact the politics of Iran and the rest of the world. So that's something that happened like just 2 days ago. So it's very fresh, and we wanted to kind of address that. But on the program today, if we have time, we also want to talk about um, a little bit of geopolitics and how China is moving, basically its bond and relationships over the Indian Ocean with Pakistan mainly. And then some cultural themes like Canada denying the decriminalization rather of drugs in Toronto, and also the dual income, no kids trend that we are seeing in demographics, and that is basically completely changing the way families are built today. So in order first, let's start with talking about this crash of Iran's president and minister. Grendel, you seem to have researched a little bit, like read a little bit about this over like on Sunday and Monday. Would you like to catch up everyone that hasn't heard about this news and
So
kind of
just disclaimer, I didn't do much research. I just actually read the article that you shared
yeah.
that highlighted that the Iranian president and the foreign minister and their staff that were traveling by helicopter actually died in the crash. And I think it said near Azerbaijan or somewhere close to there. So, from a high level point of view, that's really all I know. And I would be lying if I said I had any more insight into what would be the significant impact. But part of the thing that stood out for me in your article was that they were said to have been two of the most influential politicians in the country right now, and also that the president would have been in line to eventually succeed their religious leader, the Ayatollah. So yeah, I think that from a national impact, if he was a potential successor to their religious leader, it could have quite a significant impact on the country, given that I believe that they maintain religion as a very strong base for a lot of the things that they do, and probably everything that they do. So if you're creating a gap in leadership to that extent, just from a general point of view, I could imagine that it would create a vacuum. It would create some uncertainty, and that uncertainty could very easily see shifts or power grabs or things like that. So it is interesting. I don't know how the relationship was in terms of the potential for the foreign minister to potentially be the next country's leader and that kind of stuff. But like just thinking about it in general from an organizational point of view, if you have two of the key leaders in the place being affected by a tragedy like this, I can imagine that it could cause quite a bit of uncertainty in the country.
Mhm. And just to mention, like, I want to talk about the reactions of both the country's allies and, like, traditional enemies, if we could say it like that, because they're Shiites. They have the Shiite way of following Islam, and most of this region is like the Sunni way of following Islam. And so there are a little bit of tension, but all people from that region presented their condolences to the country. And it was a little bit weird to read article about that because basically they said that there was no alarmism on basically like how the country was going to go. Like there was no like message of terror or fear about the change in power there. So it was said to be like kind of the quiet that Iran wanted to keep in terms of geopolitics in the world. However, like you have Lebanon and Hezbollah's Lebanon and part of Lebanon and also Syria having days of just grief, like national grief, and like Hezbollah saying that the president was like a beloved martyrdom president and that he was a huge support to their group. And if people don't know what Hezbollah is basically like a terrorist cell at the south of Lebanon that has caused quite a bit of has been at the center of many wars, really in Lebanon, and it's still causing kind of turbulences, especially in the Israel-Hamas conflict right now. And it was kind of weird saying that they wanted to maintain the peace and quiet while there was such big, um, you know, big lashing out happening towards women and the people inside the country itself that we don't talk about because there is a lot of things that we need to talk about, but that is quite literally happening. People being in prison and women being like hit in the streets right now for not wearing the how the law says that they should be like dressed or things like that. And and also the fact that they quite literally like Hezbollah is pretty much confirming what we already knew, but that they were nourishing um, unstable cells in this region in order to cause like maybe to I don't know if it's to advance their plans or to cause turbulences in other countries, but it feels far from quiet for me. Like it feels quiet for them because we're not directly involved in any geopolitical conflicts compared to the past like 30 years and how their revolution went and things like that. However, like it it feels far from peaceful for me. Like if a world order is made upon like you know nourishing like cells that are known to cause instability around you in other countries, like it doesn't feel quite peaceful. But I can understand how like most people feel like it won't necessarily change a thing right now. Maybe it causes a little bit of uncertainty, but it also feels like maybe like the government is like strong enough to have a new leader come up like pretty much instantly. We don't yet know, but it doesn't seem like for now, it's going to cause a big change like we have wondered in the past 2 days. But again, it could change. And that's only my view and opinion on this. But I'm curious to know how you guys see what is happening, like the responses from other people and like how you see this evolving in the next few days to weeks, months, years.
So interestingly, while you were sharing, I was actually just looking at this an article that said then what comes next. And so part of their process is that they have to organize an election within 50 days of the passing of the current president. And they actually had an election in March, which had a quite poor turnout. And so there's a sentiment that it will be hastily organized and likely to have a poor turnout, but the potential successor, who is the vice president and the primary candidate, is considered by the populace of Iran to be just another administrator, because the Ayatollah is actually like he's the supreme leader of the country. So he's the arbiter of all domestic and foreign politics. So you kind of have a president that's an implementer more than setting a strategic direction. So it's going to be very interesting if the nation already doesn't have faith in the vice president.
Yeah, and I feel like this isn't necessarily like something that would throw Iran into turmoil. I feel like it's kind of like, I'm sure it feels like a shock, and it could feel like a loss to some people. It probably does feel like a loss to some people in Iran, but some people in Iran didn't feel that way at all and felt glad because, the president Raisi was like, um, he just had a history of being kind of brutal. Well, actually, not kind of, like actually brutal. Like he contributed to the violent crackdowns on the protests that we saw last year and before, and he made his he's first started doing that in 1988, like contributing to that kind of violent crackdown against protests. So he's not really a friend to anyone who desires democracy and freedom in Iran, but it's also not like anyone who replaces him will be, friendly to democracy in Iran. And so it doesn't really, I'm not sure if it does really change very much about how the country is going, but it could be an opportunity for something to happen. But I I felt it was, I felt it was a loving thing to do for many countries to express their condolences, nevertheless, and to offer help with like searching for him, for them, for the people who were in the crash and everything. But yeah, and I guess one thing that one thing I wanted to talk about too was I heard a little bit about like what could have caused the plane crash, because like there's a lot of speculation about what it would be, but of course like nobody can really know, at least at this point. Some people were saying like, oh my gosh, what if it was Israel, or what if it was this person or that person? But um, from what I heard and doing a little bit of research, um, that region is like, it's really foggy. It can be kind of stormy. It's very mountainous. And Iran, apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone at any time, but Iran has been kind of under an embargo for a long time, like since the 80s, because both the United States, the Western powers, and Russia have not been wanting to supply them with anything aviation related. So they've kind of had to go it on their own, and a lot of their stuff is really old and kind of not it's barely held together, kind of really old stuff. And so because of that international isolation, because like it seemed a lot of countries were like, we do not want you to like have any access to any sort of air power, because we do not think you have good intentions in the world and in the region, according to them. And so that, I think that contributed, because their equipment's really old and stuff like that. But I mean, obviously, like we know that there's a spiritual reason for everything happening. And yeah, I can't quite say what that is right off the bat in this case, but I'm just like, that's kind of it's probably the most likely explanation for what happened. Maybe I would think so, rather than like a deliberate attempt by someone to like mess with things.
Yeah, I would say a lot of leaders of this region could potentially think that there was an assassination attempt, but given the circumstances, um, and also like the timing of this, like why wouldn't this be like right before the election or things like that? Like it definitely seemed like an accident, and I totally forgot about the embargo on Iran, but it's true, like for the longest time, there was even a threat that Iran wanted to acquire nuclear power, kind of just like North Korea, actually. So there's definitely like, even though like it seems like Iran wants to have a quiet way of doing things geopolitically right now, I think the world is still like keeping its eye on the country, because obviously like there is a potential for doing the same path as other countries that we're observing right now. So yeah, this definitely comes into play for sure. And I agree with you, like I don't think like it seems pretty foggy, no pun intended. Like there is really like it wasn't intended, but it doesn't seem like there is an explanation yet for the why or um all of these things. Like I think like with Iran, like sometimes just gotta see how things evolve, quite simply. And yeah, it's always kind of blurry with Iran for sure. It's always confusing, because like we don't have a whole lot, even though like we know what they want us to see, but we don't always have a whole lot of information. Like they didn't give any information on the reasons for the accident, and they really didn't give a lot of information for the things that happened in the past 2 years. So we know a few things about it from videos, from people, from the Iranian community around the world, but we don't actually know exactly what is going on. And I think that could definitely be like not helpful in seeing the political game and the sides and decision and choices that Iran is making right now. And I think we just gotta accept that, but also we can kind of look in at their choices in how their relationships with other people is, like how people that have relationships with them react to things happening, and what we know are the indirect consequences of Iran's involvement in the Middle East, at least. So yeah, that's all I got to say. And I guess we shall see, like in the next few weeks, like what unfolds.
So another thing that I just recalled and then I checked was when we had the story about the Houthis attacking in Yemen and being quite a force in this Red Sea and in the Red Sea right now and attacking shipping and everything, Iran is actually a weapons sponsor to the Houthis in Yemen and in that conflict. And so, on a level, I must have this sense of some karmic debt being paid by the country because they've had a relationship with the Houthis since 2009. And that's primarily why there was the embargo on them, because they were supplying what has been seen as a terror group for ages. And I recall at the time we also unpacked a story that they were actually starting to develop their own weaponry. It might not have been as advanced as most other places, but they were supplying them with short-range missiles, with very low-range drones and those kind of things. And so Iran has been, for lack of a better phrasing, a little bit of a military terror in the Gulf area. And so, there's a level of karmic debt that I think is being paid off. Unfortunate that people are the subject of that karmic debt. But I believe that it might just also start to get them to pay a bit more attention, hopefully, to how they are engaging with the rest of the world.
Yeah, or I guess I know I was thinking before this live, I was thinking about, how people could attribute the deaths that happened to like karma, but just like a couple nights ago, I was like, I stumbled upon this video, and it was like reading something from Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. And he was talking about how like the Western world misunderstands karma, and it was like this whole discussion of things. But basically, I guess I just wanted to clarify, like, I guess the karma involved would be like for the people who like manifested this, and also for the nation in a way. It's more just kind of like, right, like if they've been choosing like attack or something, or they've been choosing to like sow instability, and things like that, like they're choosing it in trying to choose it in other people's lives, quote unquote, which you can't really do. That's basically, you're just choosing it for yourself, and so it's manifesting in some way, and like you don't really have control ultimately over how or when that happens. But I don't think that them dying pays a debt. I think it would be, wouldn't it be like, if you're paying karmic debt just means making a new choice, right? Like being like, now instead of like supporting violence and terror, I'm going to support peace and stability, right? Like that would be like paying off your debt, versus like if you're like, I've been supporting violence and terror and now I'm dying or I'm stubbing my toe, like that doesn't pay off karmic debt. It's just like a continuation of your karma, right? Of choosing violence and
Yeah,
terror.
so when I say karmic debt, I'm saying, and I'm literally, I think we're on the same page in terms of you don't get to create in somebody else's reality. And so the stability, the instability that's been sown across that region is now being reaped more and more inside of the country. And then also, if you look at the sense that for all intents and purposes, this is a figurehead, blunt instrument kind of energy. So implementing the desires of the supreme leader. And so if the nation is also making a new choice, the blunt instrument does, in a sense, get removed to potentially pave the way for some new thinking and new energy to come in. So yes, it might be replaced by a technical administrator, but it might also be that that person doesn't act as extremely as his predecessor.
Yeah.
So it plays out in a couple of levels, and it would be interesting to see what the overall impact is on this nation and how they show up in the world.
I'm interested to see that as well, because from my understanding, even though like obviously people were in the streets mourning the president's death a little bit on Monday night, like the quiet revolution, or not so quiet revolution, that the women have been, having, about the laws on like impeding them, like their own like body autonomy, and the low turnout to the election this year, which was pretty important, as we have been talking about, like the series of like dozens and dozens of elections that we are seeing this year all over the world. It seems like it was one of these things where the government wasn't really applying the choices of the people. And I don't know if it's majority of the people, but since we have been seeing such a harsh, crackdown on any revolts, any kind of not agreeing with the government's law, I would say that we could see change here. And obviously, we're going to see upheaval from the different choices of decades of just being in that political structure. But the best case scenario, and I don't want to be super optimistic, but the best case scenario is that we could actually maybe see change. Maybe not right now because a technical administrator, the vice president, is going to be coming and taking the place of a president, but maybe in 50 days, maybe in a year, maybe later, but there might be like a change happening for sure in terms of
Absolutely. And the
spirituality,
other thing
emotionally.
would be that the Ayatollah is meant to pass on power within this year still. So like he's like at what I think 88 or something like that. So there are shifts.
Yeah.
Wait, no, he was supposed to. He's was saying I want to pass on power this year.
No, I'm saying the sentiment is that there will be a shift with his leadership position as well within this year. And so if you don't have somebody as like-minded,
How a successor.
so you have that almost a vacuum created on that dense energy
Mhm.
because you don't have such a strong person. It could very well be the shift that this country has been calling in.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez. I feel like that's probably the biggest area. I feel like that's probably the biggest impact. I don't know why, but I wasn't aware how old the Ayatollah was and how pressing this need for a successor was. That's huge though, because if he had in mind, he was like, "Oh, like President Ricey, like you're gonna succeed me," and then he dies, like that's a huge alarm bell, I feel, like not in a good or bad way, but just kind of it's a big indicator light, right? Flashing on your dashboard. Like, hey, something's not very stable in the choices you're making, right? Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, you
That's
need to make a new choice now. Yeah, I wasn't realizing that the Sheikh of Iran was that old, and that's definitely like that's a supreme leader, that's a religious leader. So it was going to be like a big thing. And I mean, good on Iran, honestly, because a president with that much grip on the country becoming the Sheikh, that would have been like, I don't want to say next level dictatorship, but I mean,
But
who
it
has
smells
that?
like it, right? So, my
It
friends
smelled
and I
like it.
have this
Yeah.
saying is if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, how can't it be a
Yeah.
duck?
Yeah. Yeah. It was already some level of dictatorship in the presidency. So I think anyone would have thought that like at one point or another. Like I don't think I'm making super like wild assumptions by thinking that for sure. Yeah, so yeah, it's going to be interesting. I kind of want to talk about another country that is advancing their pawn in the geopolitical game, and that is China with Pakistan. And maybe quickly, like we could talk about like what that entails regionally and for the world at this time, and if that has any if we can draw any parallel with last week's discussion on making relationships in order to gain power or grasp for power when you feel like you're in lack of it. So I don't know, yeah. Grenville, would you mind like summarizing again, like a little bit of a situation for us?
Yeah, sure. So China and Pakistan have been apparently in a relationship around sharing technology advancements and those kind of things since 1963. So it's quite a long-standing alliance. But what has happened over the last few years is that Pakistan has procured 8 almost very silent, very powerful submarines from China, 4 of which would have been built on Chinese soil in their shipyards, and then 4 in Pakistan. So they're expanding their naval collaboration. It's also extending into further naval exercises the way that was happening with oh gosh, now I forget the countries, but yeah, so there's a naval cooperation happening there, and with that they're also trying to diminish what China believes India's strength in the Indian Ocean region to be. So they're trying to counteract the upcoming power of India in that region, and forming alliances with Pakistan, with Myanmar, with the Maldives. And also, the whole idea is that the more relationships China forms, the greater it secures itself in that Indo-Pacific region, which the US has been supporting for a long time and trying to advance for a long time. And China's kind of been its almost counter rudder in that place. So they're saying that they do not want to recognize the Indo-Pacific as a region. And so there's this thing called the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and lots of trade relationships, military relationships, naval relationships, and it's basically to secure the region for themselves because Pakistan is so close to the Gulf where all this uncertainty is happening, and it's a significant trade route for China for cheap energy. So there's also a military base that will go up in one of Pakistan's ports that's on the Gulf to ensure that they build greater levels of what they believe will be maritime security.
So it literally feels like a game of chess because the US and the UK have an accord with Japan and Australia to kind of protect that side of the region. And obviously, like they have Taiwan, so China can't move on Taiwan quite yet because they know that a lot of the submarines of NATO are here to kind of protect the economic maritime region. People in between India, like the countries in between India and these other countries on this front, won't take sides with China, obviously. And they're kind of playing Pakistan on their common dislike of India in order to kind of ensure that they have power over the region. So I think they're not in it quite like Pakistan is in it because it's obviously not just for India. It's also for a whole lot of things. And that is a game that obviously like kind of like we've been saying with other countries and with Iran has its own karma because you're bonding on the dislike of our country, on the non-recognition of how much the world has helped build your economy, and now you're trying to be autonomous with your own power, but a power that wants to destroy the roots in terms of war and commerce of other countries. So that doesn't feel quite good, but it does feel like a game of chess where there is like two fronts, two diagonal fronts, and it's a little bit weird, but it makes sense why allies of NATO have been making individually and commonly like so many moves in the past few weeks in order to secure that line a little bit because they knew that Russia, China, Pakistan, like all of these places wanted to have a better collaboration, and they needed to make sure that at least they show that they care about this region and that people cannot like act without consequences in here. But again, like that's my assumption and how I kind of visualize in my mind like the geopolitical game that has been playing there. I kind of wonder like what Isaiah and Sage are thinking about it. If you have any thoughts on what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so because Granville, you were saying that like there's gonna be a military base built. Is it a military base, like a naval base being built by China? Is the idea that the base will be owned by China or that'll be owned by Pakistan?
So I'm not certain of that dynamic. For me, what I've read from the article highlighting the geopolitics of that Indian Ocean region. They have a base in Djibouti and they are establishing a base in Pakistan on the Gulf.
I was just curious if it's one of those things where like China China like gives something to someone, like builds something for another country or lends money to another country basically, and then like the other country, like there's no way they can pay off that debt, so China's like, okay, I'll take that. Like I was just wondering if that was another one of China's like little moves there, like they did that with a lot of countries. And um yeah, I was just wondering, they probably have something like that going on with Pakistan, or no?
I'm not sure, but I also know that Pakistan was at some point also quite prolific in the nuclear armaments race. So there's definitely a much, and I almost have this feeling of these nations trauma bonding. So let's all band together against our common enemy kind of thing. So, and especially, I mean, the word just came to me when you was saying, there's some type of bonding. And like, it feels like trauma bonding. Like they all don't like the same person. And so let's sit in the pain together and believe that we are securing ourselves against further pain. And I feel like, to me, there's a sense that we don't want to heal. We will rather form a line and point fingers across the corridor than look internally to see what we need to actually resolve.
Yeah, I feel like yeah, like Pakistan and India still, they are still either very much in the process of healing the whole conflict with the partition,
Yeah.
of India, or I don't know, or they're just still actively letting the wound just kind of like fester and be there. So, but
Not
I
just
don't.
that, but I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but not just that, but there's also like in the past 20 years, especially like before like the past 10 years, there's been like actively you know, regional conflicts on the borders and terrorism groups. Um, we don't know if supported by Pakistan or not, that have been created like instability in that region still. And it's been like, what, more than 50 years, 60 years? So yeah, that's quite harsh. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen like Miss Marvel, the series.
Miss
But
Marvel.
these are like Pakistani American people. And it's super beautiful. They're talking about like how every family has a story from the partition, and obviously it's trauma, but it was really beautifully written, and we understand like it was such a traumatic event, like and done at about the same time as the Holocaust, and it was such like it was really traumatic, but like the same as other ethnicities in the world, like there's definitely and the same as last week, actually, in our discussion, there's definitely a thing about like we don't want to heal, and it feels like Pakistan sometimes entrenches itself in that thing, and I think maybe like it's super weird, like how people maybe want to help like Indian economy a lot, but it's not necessarily as extended to Pakistan. First of all, because we're so closed off to the world, but also because like they're not necessarily choosing to build relationships and partnerships with us. And so you see people that are in the same conditions, but that we can't necessarily help if they don't want to like admit that, hey, like we need partnerships, we need relationships, we need forgiveness, we need to extend a hand, and like I don't know, but yeah, I just wanted to add that historical context that I picked up on from years of like either studying it or observing it. But yeah, what do you want to say? Yeah, you had a feeling that Pakistan still like there was still like a wound that was festering.
Oh yeah, just that yeah, just kind of the um yeah, like the Hindu Muslim kind of conflict that is playing out in India, unfortunately, and that yeah, has played out between Pakistan and India, and then how they align with yeah, other powers to kind of like yeah, carry out that conflict basically. And yeah, I do feel like that's a really interesting like thing in common that you're seeing, because like it's the same thing, like China, the current leadership at least of China um is like, oh, we don't want to acknowledge how like our partnership with the Western countries led to China's big economic growth. And it's kind of the same vibe going on with Pakistan, like how kind of like not allowing in cooperation and partnership, except with like other countries that kind of have like an aligned agenda, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Um, yes and no. Um, it looks a little bit the same. I didn't see it in that way. But I most so that like we know the economic gaps in the Indian population just because of the number, the sheer number, and the difference in culture, and the fact that there are sub-economies inside the economy. And well, I would say that there is a lot of partnership in order to help India bridge that economic gap all around in different ways. And I don't see that with Pakistan. And Pakistan is like there is a lot of poverty. Like we need to help people there. But the fact that all of the economy is going into kind of nuclear weaponry, like not in the people, first of all, that's already a huge problem. And also like the culture of we don't want to have anything to do with people who remotely support like Indian culture is also kind of weird. And uh, you know, as much as I think like Pakistani people, they bring so much to the world in terms of culture, like we can also feel um when it's tense and separate. And I think like unconsciously, like as human beings, we don't necessarily like that or don't want to approach that too closely. And yeah, that's just like there are just a lot of wounds there that make it similar to China, but also very different. And yeah, that's just what I wanted to say. I don't know if it seemed like we had different like ways of seeing that, but it's probably like a problem with that is multifaceted. Like I don't, it's complex, you know.
I also feel like, like at the core of it, I feel like there's the wound that you were talking to. That the core of it is that they've been gearing themselves to protect themselves from a world that's in a state of disaster, kind of thing. Because Pakistan has very much ramped up, they were quite busy in ramping up their nuclear power, the intelligence power, also very private. So you almost don't quite have a sense of what the true wound is. But again, I think it's that the depth of the hurt that is being covered up by the super defensiveness and creating these partnerships with potential defenders. We might not always agree with the way that these are potential defenders, but I mean, from a technological point of advancement point of view, if China's building submarines for them, they definitely have quite a bit of advancement. But then part of the caveat is that Germany has actually declined to supply engines for some of those submarines. So, there's again, Yurini, it's that game of chess. And, it's almost like, to me, it's almost a further extent of the game of Battlefield. So you don't actually know quite what's happening on the other side of the wall. You just know you have to secure yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit Cold War thinking for sure, which I understand um, from the trauma point of view of a country like that, but I feel like the world very much wants to advance into a new way of relating right now, and most of the conflicts that we're seeing, whether it be like Congo, Sudan, or even like the the sense of being left behind that Pakistan has, is rooted in like not really advancing there, and usually like not advancing there means that not maturing there means that there's still like a pretty much a wound to heal. Like you're still at a baby state emotionally in some places of your structure, your society, your emotional being, you know.
And I wanted, though, just one thing I want to say too is I feel like it actually comes down to a feeling of lack, and which can be remedied by, loving yourself and focusing on yourself. But for Pakistan, because Pakistan and India do both have a lot of great natural resources and stuff like that, but like I think with Pakistan, they have a little bit of a they manifested a little bit of a tougher situation than India, because India is so much more like agriculturally capable and like so much more vast of a territory and, you know, large population. And like it seems like the partition, the way it happened, might have been like more advantageous for India in some ways, possibly. And Pakistan's um, the sentiment in Pakistan might be kind of. I feel like that's something that could be at play, where it's like, rather than be like um, focus on like the antagonism and the rivalry, and feeding the conflict to distract yourself from the difficulties that you have. Instead, just address the difficulties you have and form healthy partnerships. You know what I mean? A lot of the times I feel like it's a pattern you see with countries where it's like they might have some really challenging problems, but then they like divert everyone's attention into like a grievance, and then people are like, that's fine, let's just put our energy into a grievance, and that's gonna psychologically sustain us, and give us a reason for all of our problems, rather than it being, we have to do something about it, and everybody experiences that in their life to some extent. I feel like if you're just
Yeah.
blaming instead of taking responsibility for whatever situation you manifested, not to say that their situation is like terrible or anything, but it's like I was feeling like that might be part of the dynamic, there.
Yeah.
And also, we must remember that they are the seventh most advanced well, the seventh biggest military in the world for that size of country. So, there's a lot of energy going into defensiveness as opposed to progression.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's not to say like really that India is perfect. Like let's see like Modi and its management of the still Muslim minorities as of today, but like the border clash and projection, like the things that we were talking about, Sage, we see it happen in so many countries right now at so many borders, but it feels like we can even like compare it to Israel and Palestine in some kind of far off way, but we also see like how India, even though imperfect, has chosen overall to move on and move out of the situation. And so is maybe demonstrating that there is a way. And just like showing the way there is showing like goodness of heart, and goodness of heart, like you don't have to be a saint to be able to move forward. Like it's still possible, you know? And I hope that you, whether like you people have been affected by the partition or any like ethnic trauma or division in the post-colonial world or even before, like that they would see that there is an example that it's still possible to advance, like if you really want to, and to refocus energy on things that actually matters, even though it's not easy. Like obviously it's going to be super hard at the beginning, but also like you need to start somewhere, you know? And if you look at, I don't know, like Singapore or things like that, like you can see that um starting somewhere doesn't have to take like 100 years. Like the shortcut that you're trying to take by the defensiveness is going to be more costly than keeping your head down for like 20 years and just thriving afterwards, you know? And yeah, that's just it, you know? That's a new way of living. Like it's, you gotta learn it, but you gotta accept that it requires partnership too. And yeah, that's it. So lastly today, we're going to talk a little bit about Toronto's desire to decriminalize drug use and why Canada denies it. The Canadian government denies it. And yeah, I feel like it's a pretty interesting topic. Like, Sage, would you like to summarize what it's about for us?
Yeah, like, so you could go so much more deeply into it, but I guess at the base level, or the serious level of it, like Toronto's proposal was to decriminalize people possessing a personal use amount of hard drugs, like 2.5 grams or something. So that it would be legal to possess that and to use that. Anything more than that, you couldn't legally possess. And so Toronto, excuse me, wanted to be like, hey, let's decriminalize, not legalize, but decriminalize these drugs.
Mhm.
And the drug dealing still wouldn't be legal and all of that. And then the Ontario government was saying, like, there's no way, like, we absolutely oppose this because they have like a conservative government in Ontario. And so when Toronto requested permission from the federal government of Canada, the federal government said no, kind of in the wake of everything that's happened since last year in British Columbia. So in the province of British Columbia, like they have tried that, and they actually walked it back close to a month ago. So possession of personal use amounts of hard drugs was legal in, and it still is in British Columbia. Now it's illegal to use the drugs in public spaces. It used to be, and for that period, it used to be legal to use the drugs in public spaces anywhere except around and in schools and airports. So, but it started to get really bad because people would use the drugs in hospitals. They would use the drugs in public places like in the park, and you're bringing your children along and there's people doing hard drugs legally, and the police can't do anything about it. And it was
Not
just
to mention the stuff that gets left behind.
the stuff that right, like
uh,
if you're injecting. So it's just it certainly was a terrible situation in many ways. And of course the overdose rate only increased because of that. The idea is that it would decrease it, that because it would, instead of people being criminally penalized for having and using these drugs, instead they would be told to seek treatment and directed to that. It's kind of complicated though, because the police didn't even have the right to confiscate the drugs. You know, it's like, hey man, I noticed you have a problem. You should probably seek out treatment, you know? So that was the idea. But yeah, it just ended up being really messy for British Columbia. And yeah, the government of Canada was like, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to allow that in Toronto until we iron out the wrinkles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vancouver has definitely started to look a little bit like Los Angeles or Philadelphia in that way of like we see lanes of crackheads kind of zombie walking because
Yeah.
of their thing, and we're laughing at that now, but it's pretty like it's painful to watch sometimes. And I feel like North America is so traumatized by how it's going right now that I don't think that they want to advance these types of programs without having a solid plan in the future. And I don't think it is going to be a near future for most of them. It's worked like, they wanted to be a little bit like Portugal, even though Portugal, it was just like weed or things like that, or a little bit like Quebec. And again, like Quebec, it was just like weed and medicinal drugs. Like it was a little bit, Toronto was not asking for much, but like the trauma of having to experience like Vancouver turning into like a zombie city, I don't think we're going to be agreeing to that anytime soon. So I think you just have to treat it with compassion and just be patient, because like it's not like the easiest of situations to navigate, to be honest. Like it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of painful to watch, honestly.
I'm sorry, that was just a really, it's kind of a humorous way of describing the situation, but it's not inaccurate though, unfortunately.
In Philly, in like Kensington, they call it Zombie Land,
Yeah.
because of that. Yeah. There definitely needs to be
Yeah.
better. There's a better way to do it, and we just have to like figure that out and figure out how to implement that.
Be open to that.
Did you say the area is called Kensington?
Uh,
I live in Kensington in Johannesburg, South Africa.
that's funny.
But yeah, I have to agree because I feel like, yes, we know that in the history of people telling other people what to do, it's never really worked very well. But again, there is a level where, especially if it starts to affect the public life in public supposedly safe spaces, I would definitely be averse to making that kind of decision. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, but we're definitely going to talk about this a little more. I feel like we already talked about how Vancouver's law was kind of failing. Like I think it was a year ago. I don't know. But I think it's maybe proof that we're going to talk a little bit about this because I don't think it's the end of the problem. Like we've been talking about that at least 2 times since the beginning of 2024. But for now, that is all that we have today. And thank you to everyone who has watched us live or on YouTube. If you enjoy these types of discussion, please be sure to like, subscribe, or comment so that we can continue to do these and maybe suggest like a topic that you would like us to talk about next week or in the few coming weeks. And yeah, wish you a good day and see you soon. Bye-bye.